Merry Christmas. Today I'm looking at the Deviant issues 1 and 2 by James Tynion IV and Joshua Hixson. And let me tell you, this book really butters my biscuit. If you can't tell by the font, it is basically a horror movie in comic book form. And James Tynion IV is really good at creepy stuff and horror-based stuff, so as we all expected, it's very good. Honestly, I feel a little bit silly making a review about it, because Tynion is one of the greatest writers out there right now in the comics world. He really doesn't miss. And as I was going through this issue, I was looking for things I could comment on as maybe not their best work, or not super convincing of the moment, but it's solid. All the way through, it is a solid book. Tynion has created some three-dimensional characters with real-life problems that have interesting dialogue, as always. The pacing is really strong, the flashbacks are really strong. It's a very seamless, uninterrupted read. Very smooth. And it's very cinematic too. This is as close as a comic book can get to being a movie. I feel like I'm watching a movie when I read these comics. And the art from Joshua Higgins is really great as well. I mean, look at his face down here. Look at the complexity of emotion on that face. Overall, the comic gives me a really strong Batman Year One vibe. And if you haven't read Batman Year One, it's by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, two excellent comic creators. It's one of the greatest Batman stories I've read. It's got some of the most compelling art I've ever seen in a comic book. The colors are gorgeous. The world building and the texturing just feels so real. It's one of the greatest Batman stories out there. And it's partly because of that story, as well as Daredevil Born Again, that I'm a huge fan of David Mazzucchelli. So to say that this art looks a lot like David Mazzucchelli's art is a high compliment, coming from me at least. Joshua Hixson also did the colors in this book, and the colors are really great as well. They're also very reminiscent of Batman Year One, but they feel very fresh. I mean, really, just look at this gorgeous opening page. Look at the colors. It's gritty, but also shiny. Gorgeous art, really. But honestly, the page of art that really got me was this page here on the right, with the cop cars driving through snow. And look at how much empty space is up here, but it just makes the whole composition feel so empty and lonely and scary. Just look at the emotion dripping from that page. Ooh! I should mention, if you haven't read it, or if you're planning to read it and you don't know what to expect, it is about a serial killer, and it is pretty dark. There's some very graphic imagery in here, and it took me completely by surprise. So just so you know, it's very dark. Issue 2 just came out today, so I went and bought it from my local comics retailer, which you should support. You should support local comics dealers. It's important that you do that. And right away, the first page in issue 2 here is such a great establishing shot. I mean, Hixton is killing it here. Look at the way he's using his space. It's gorgeous. You feel like you're in this house. And then if you look really close at the bookshelf, you can see that this character has a copy of Watchmen, which is great. And then he's got 3 volumes of this comic called Big Sword, which is very clearly a parody of Berserk. I just love it when they put those little Easter eggs in there for you to find. The tiny details that add up to a bigger picture. There aren't as many big scary moments in issue 2 as there was in issue 1, but that makes sense because issue 1 is trying to set up your expectations. This is definitely a horror comic book, so they want to make sure that you're scared in that first issue. And then in the second issue, he's coming back and prioritizing character development. But the main plot is still going on in the background. So here's my interpretation of the Deviant so far. My understanding is that Tynion is trying to show us what it's like to grow up as a gay man in America. We have this serial killer that's killing men and also young boys, and he's supposedly committing homosexual acts at some point in there. And they're calling him the Deviant serial killer because most of his most famous killings happened in the 70s, and, you know, it was the 70s. So what I think Tynion is trying to say is that in the eyes of some people, if you're gay, you might as well be a serial killer. Which, in Protestant Christian America, isn't all that far-fetched, because it all comes down to the way that people think about sin. And to Protestant Christians, there's no such thing as worse sins or better sins, right? It's just all sin. So you've got being a serial killer on the same plane as telling a lie, or also on the same plane as being gay, right? So it doesn't matter how you deviate, the point is that you deviated. So the main character talks about how he can't do normal things like fold wrapping paper perfectly anymore, and it makes him feel like there's something wrong with him. Or he goes and talks to a supposed serial killer, and he says that he felt something familiar there. It seems like he's trying to come to terms with his identity, while everyone is telling him that his identity is basically evil. And there's never a point where anybody in the story outright says being gay is bad, right? Because Tynion understands that showing is better than telling, so it's much more convincing to just put him in situations where people are uncomfortable, and we get get a sense of why they're uncomfortable, and it shows us what it's like to be a gay man in America. For example, in issue 2, as the main character goes around interviewing people trying to gather content for the story he's trying to write about the serial killer, he meets one of the cops who caught the guy in 1973. And this cop is totally fine with him. He's just chilling and making jokes for a while until he mentions that he's gay, and then the cop clams up a little bit. He doesn't outright act like a bigot, but you can tell this guy is not cool with talking to a gay guy. And then the cop's wife brings the main character his coffee in a Make America Great Again mug, and it's a great moment. It's just sweet baby rays, what a great moment in this book. And then the writer pulls out his laptop, which has a rainbow on it, which is another great moment of showing, not telling. And from there, the cop is pretty much done with the interview. So again, there's no outright bigotry. If it was a Marvel comic nowadays, you'd have somebody literally spewing hate, because that's the way Marvel does it. They're just very blunt about things. But because it's Tynion, we get to share this very subtle, understated feeling that there's something wrong here. And you can tell this cop thinks that there is something wrong with the main character because he is gay. It's almost like the cop thinks that because this writer is gay, he's on the same team as a serial killer. And he doesn't say that outright, but it's implied. So that's what I think. I think this is a story about how the world views gay people dressed up as a Christmas horror story. And it's great, really. I mean, everything about this comic is so well done. Even the lettering feels great. Look at that. Look at this great panel. What a gorgeous piece of art. So I'm loving it. It's one of the greatest comics that's coming out right now. You should absolutely go and buy it. Let's get it into second and third printing. I'm sure it's already in second printing. I know it's sold out almost immediately because it's great. Now, I went through these issues with a fine-tooth comb. I was looking for anything I could point out that's not perfect. I found one thing. It's this car. Look at this car. Look how dopey that car looks. Especially compared to how nice it looks on this page. There's the first car, there's the second car. Are they the same car? Well, I don't know. What are you doing, Joshua Hixson? What's going on with this car right here? It doesn't look anything like the car in the other panels. You can draw this car just fine. Why'd you draw it so weird? That's not where the wheels go. What's going on with the windows? Oh my gosh. But other than that, it's perfect. So I'd say the Deviant so far is easily a 9 out of 10, both issues 1 and 2. I love the story, I love the dialogue, I love the pacing, I love the line work, I love the coloring, I love the lettering. It's really just a well-rounded piece of art. You should absolutely go buy it for yourself. Did you read it? What do you think? Today's question comes from Justin Stone. That's a cool name. I bet this guy looks like John Wayne. And he wants to know, I really like the classic horror comics by EC Comics. What can I read that's coming out lately that's like those? You know, I've thought about this, and there just isn't that much that's a lot like old EC stuff. Because back then it was a lot more common for comics to be anthology-based, where you'd have stories that were not connected to each other at all, one in a row after another. And there aren't very many comics now that have that same style, but are also as creepy or just off-putting as the old EC stuff was. And if there are things like that now, they're usually just not very good. The closest thing I can think of to that that's actually good and is creepy or just off-putting and has independent episodes that aren't always connected is Ice Cream Man. I love this series. It's creepy, it's got great art, it's got great writing. There are a couple characters that do last throughout the series, but it is still a different story every time, more or less. So if you like this, you might like this. Good question.